Hi there, good to have you back. This is Jackson from Animal Encounters, and today I'll be covering the 5 worst cage diving disasters. From a great white forcing its way into a cage off South Africa to a deadly collision in New Zealand's rough seas, where sometimes a cage just isn't enough to protect you. Let's start in Gansby, where this cage diver was already dead. He just didn't know it yet. It was July 14th, 2015, and the winter cold had settled over the Western Cape, drawing great white sharks into the narrow channel between Dyer Island and Geyser Rock, known to locals as Shark Alley. The concentration of Cape fur seals made this stretch one of the most reliable shark viewing locations on Earth, and a small industry of cage diving operators competed fiercely along the Gansby waterfront. Wietse Claerhout was a 46-year-old corporate logistics consultant from Bruges, Belgium, midway through a 3-week solo holiday along South Africa's southern coast, an experienced recreational diver with over 200 logged dives. Claerhout had booked the cage dive through a small owner-operated charter that advertised guaranteed sightings at rates undercutting the larger outfits by nearly half. The operation was run by Hendra Volshank, a 53-year-old former commercial fisherman who had transitioned into shark tourism 4 years earlier. Volshank ran a converted fishing vessel with a 2-man crew and 1 steel cage. His business relied on aggressive chumming that drew sharks into close proximity with the cage, producing dramatic encounters that generated word-of-mouth bookings. What gets me about this setup is that every paying client on that boat was trusting their life to a man whose entire business model depended on getting sharks as close to the cage as possible. The morning departure carried Claerhout and 3 other clients. Volshank anchored approximately 200 yards off Dyer Island and began deploying heavy quantities of chum, fish oil, blood, and sardine fragments, supplemented by a tuna head on a rope line, dragging it close to the cage. The cage was a standard open-top design, the upper section featuring horizontal bars spaced narrowly, but wide enough for the shark's snout to wedge under force. This gap was the only section not fully enclosed by steel. Claerhout entered first, wearing a wetsuit and weight belt provided by the operation. Within minutes, the chumming had attracted 3 great whites. The largest, a female estimated at over 15 feet, made repeated close passes on the tuna head. Great white sharks are the largest predatory fish on Earth, with adult females commonly exceeding 15 feet and weighing over 2,500 pounds. They possess among the strongest bite forces measured in any living animal, and their serrated teeth shear through flesh, blubber, and bone with mechanical efficiency. When agitated by bait, their behavior shifts from investigatory passes to direct, high-speed strikes. Inside confined spaces, a great white's primary instinct is not to attack, but to escape, and the resulting thrashing generates enormous destructive force in every direction. Volshank continued dragging the tuna head along the surface, pulling it progressively closer to the cage. According to the investigation, the bait line drifted to within several feet of the cage's open-top section, violating standard separation practices. The large female tracked the bait in a fast, direct approach. Her momentum carried her past the bait, and her snout drove into the cage's open-top section, wedging between the horizontal bars. Her mouth opened reflexively as she became trapped, and her body slammed against the cage frame. The shark thrashed in panicked disorientation, convulsing as she fought to free herself. Scene reconstruction indicated the event lasted between 3 and 5 seconds. During those seconds, the trapped animal's snout, open jaws, and body struck everything inside the cage with chaotic, devastating force. 3 to 5 seconds. That's how long the shark was in the cage. I know it might sound like nothing until you picture being trapped in a steel box with a 15-foot animal that's panicking just as badly as you are. Claerhout was directly beneath the entry point. The shark's thrashing crushed him against the cage bars, and as the animal twisted, its jaws and rough skin scraped and caught across his head and shoulder, serrated teeth catching wetsuit neoprene and the tissue beneath. The blunt force impact drove him against the bars before the shark wrenched herself free and disappeared into open water. Volshenk and his deckhand hauled the cage to the surface within seconds to a minute. Claerhaut was unresponsive, blood loss massive and immediate. The crew applied compression and radioed for emergency transport. Wietse Claerhaut succumbed to his injuries en route to shore. The investigation determined that excessive chumming and close proximity bait dragging had contributed directly to the incident. Volschenk's operating license was suspended. I first thought the cage was supposed to be the one thing between him and the ocean. Instead, it became the thing that held him in place while the ocean came to him. A great white surged into the cage, and a routine shark dive off South Africa became a death scene in under 5 seconds. But up next, we head to Australia's Northern Territory, where the danger wasn't in the open ocean. It was in a lagoon, behind a latch that never fully closed. It was September 19th, 2017, and the late dry season had baked the landscape surrounding a small, privately operated wildlife park, roughly 90 minutes south of Darwin. The facility housed rescued and captive-bred saltwater crocodiles, funded through admission fees, and a signature attraction that allowed visitors to be lowered into a transparent acrylic enclosure submerged in a lagoon alongside the park's largest resident crocodiles. Fenella Gudge was a 28-year-old veterinary technician from Christchurch, New Zealand, 7 months into a solo backpacking trip through Southeast Asia and Australia. Gudge had worked with reptiles at a rehabilitation center and considered herself comfortable around large predators. The crocodile immersion had been recommended by fellow travelers at a hostel in Darwin. The acrylic enclosure was a cylindrical unit with a top-loading hatch, requiring an operator to manually engage a 2-stage latch from the exterior. The first stage held the hatch loosely. The second locked it flush against a rubber gasket. Both required deliberate engagement. The dominant resident of the lagoon was a 17-foot male weighing an estimated 1,400 pounds that had occasionally bumped and nudged the cylinder during previous immersions. The seasonal employee assigned to the enclosure that afternoon had been at the park for less than 3 weeks, with only 2 supervised sessions before being assigned solo duty. What unsettles me is how small the failure was. Not a structural collapse, not a design flaw, just a latch that looked closed but wasn't, and an employee 3 weeks into the job who didn't check twice. Gudge entered through the top hatch and was lowered into the lagoon. The water was characteristically murky, visibility roughly 4 feet. The operator engaged the latch, but accumulated wear and mineral residue along the channel had caused the hatch to sit slightly misaligned. The second stage appeared to seat, but had not fully engaged. The operator did not visually confirm the lock, and remained nearby but briefly diverted his attention to another guest. Saltwater crocodiles are the largest living reptiles on Earth, with dominant males regularly exceeding 17 feet and weighing over 1,500 pounds. They possess among the strongest bite forces measured in any living animal. Their hunting strategy relies on patience and explosive ambush, remaining submerged and motionless, virtually invisible in murky water, before launching with devastating speed. The attack involves clamping onto the victim and initiating the death roll, a violent spinning maneuver that tears tissue before dragging the victim beneath the surface. The crocodile had been resting in the deeper section, approximately 20 feet away. Within minutes, it began a slow approach. The first contact was a lateral nudge against the acrylic wall, a behavior staff had observed before. The second nudge struck the upper section near the hatch. The partially seated latch shifted on the first nudge. On the second, it disengaged entirely, and the hatch lifted open. The crocodile's response was immediate. The animal forced its head and upper body against the open hatch, driving it wider with sheer momentum. In the chaos of the breach, its jaws clamped around Gudge's right arm and shoulder. Her upper body had been near the hatch at the time. The bite crushed bone and tore through soft tissue as the crocodile hauled her partially through the opening. Staff who witnessed the moment described an explosive, chaotic motion. The crocodile wrenching the victim from the enclosure within seconds. The whole thing was over before anyone on the bank could move. That's the part I keep going back to. How fast the water went from still to chaos and then back to still again. The crocodile released briefly and repositioned its grip before initiating the death roll. The rotation dislocated Gudge's shoulder and tore muscle from bone. The animal dragged her beneath the surface within seconds. Staff remained on the banks deploying noise deterrents, but the murky conditions made any intervention impossible. The surface disturbance subsided within seconds. Recovery operations located Guj's remains the following morning. The cause of death was drowning compounded by bite trauma. The investigation identified the improperly seated hatch latch as the direct cause. The park suspended operations indefinitely. She went into that enclosure trusting that someone had done their job. That's the contract you make with every tourist attraction you've ever visited. And this is what it looks like when it breaks. One unsecured latch was all it took. A 17-foot crocodile exploited the gap, and a tourist attraction became a crime scene. But the next story is different, because off Mexico's Pacific coast, the cage held perfectly. The diver didn't. It was November 3rd, 2016, and the volcanic cliffs of Guadalupe Island rose from the Pacific approximately 150 miles off the Baja California coast. The remote island had become one of the world's premier great white shark destinations, its clear waters offering visibility exceeding 100 feet and a resident shark population that returned each autumn to feed on seal colonies. Renier Gravenstein was a 31-year-old freelance underwater photographer from Mossel Bay, South Africa, who had spent 3 years building a marine predator portfolio. He had completed cage dives in South Africa and South Australia. He booked on a budget live-aboard charter out of Ensenada at roughly half the price of established operators. The charter ran a converted fishing vessel with a crew of 4. The operation used surface cages with hookah breathing systems and a narrow viewing slot along the front panel, just wide enough to accommodate a camera housing. Gravenstein's camera was a bulky aluminum unit with a wide-angle dome port. Capturing the shots he wanted required extending the housing through the slot, positioning the lens as far forward as possible. I understand the impulse. You're a photographer. The shot is right there. And every time you lean out a little further and nothing happens, it reinforces the idea that nothing will, until it does. The morning's first dive attracted several great whites within 30 minutes. The largest, estimated at over 16 feet, made wide passes before gradually tightening its pattern. Great white sharks rely on lateral approaches when investigating potential prey, turning broadside to assess size before committing. When bait is present, passes accelerate and tighten as feeding motivation increases. A great white at full speed can cover dozens of feet in a second or two, and the transition from circling to committed strike happens with virtually no warning. According to the crew's account, the bait float had drifted during a current shift, drawing the tuna head closer to the cage over several minutes. The crew's attention was divided managing multiple lines. No one corrected the drift. Gravenstein had been extending through the viewing slot repeatedly, each time leaning further. Witnesses confirmed he had his shoulders pressed against the opening, arms fully extended, when the large female made her final approach. The shark struck the bait in a direct, high-speed pass. The trajectory brought her body across the viewing slot at full velocity. The contact lasted less than a second. The shark's open jaws caught Gravenstein's extended right arm, the serrated teeth shearing through his wetsuit and tearing irregularly through the tissue beneath before the animal carried clear. Less than a second. That's the entire window of contact. One pass, and the damage was already done. The force of the strike wrenched his arm and shoulder violently against the cage bars, the impact crushing his upper body against the steel frame. He fell back inside the cage, blood clouding the water immediately. The crew hauled the cage within a minute. The pass had nearly severed his right arm, and the violent impact against the bars had caused severe chest trauma. Rapid blood loss, compounded by the vessel's distance from medical care, left no margin for survival. Gravenstein lost consciousness within minutes. The vessel was over 5 hours from the nearest mainland hospital. Renier Gravenstein was pronounced dead aboard the charter before it cleared Guadalupe's southern point. The charter's permits were revoked, 5 hours from the nearest hospital. That's the detail that stays with me. Even if the injuries had been survivable, the distance wasn't. A single pass from a great white turned a photography trip into a tragedy 5 hours from shore. But up next, we head to Hawaii, where the danger wasn't a shark. It was the cage itself. It was March 22nd, 2014, and the winter swells had finally subsided along Oahu's north shore, leaving the waters calm under a subtropical sun. The calmer conditions brought tiger sharks into the shallower coastal waters to feed on sea turtles and reef fish along the shoreline. Llewellyn Prestholt was a 58-year-old retired middle school teacher from Corvallis, Oregon, traveling with her adult daughter, Danica, 31. Prestholt had assembled a list of experiences she intended to complete before her 60th birthday, and swimming alongside sharks had occupied the top position since watching a documentary. The previous winter, the legitimate operators on Oahu's north shore ran permitted excursions with commercially rated equipment. A flyer at the hostel where Danica had arranged lodging advertised a private shark encounter at a fraction of the commercial rate. The operation was run out of a harbor by a single individual with no permits, no insurance, and no licensed affiliation. The vessel was a 22-foot center console. The cage was welded from rebar stock with bar spacing significantly wider than any commercial unit. The door was secured by a steel pin threaded through 2 loops of bent rebar, relying entirely on gravity and friction, a hostile flyer, and a handshake. That's the entire safety infrastructure between a retired schoolteacher and the open ocean. No permits, no insurance, no certified equipment, just rebar and a rope. This honestly just baffles me at how this was even allowed. Prestholt and Danica arrived shortly after sunrise. Danica would later tell investigators the operation appeared less professional than expected, but her mother had been determined to proceed. The operator motored approximately 3 miles offshore to water above a reef shelf, where tiger sharks patrolled during the spring months. Tiger sharks are among the shark species most frequently involved in fatal attacks on humans. Adult females commonly exceed 12 feet and weigh between 800 and 1,400 pounds. They are opportunistic feeders with the broadest prey range of any large shark. Their serrated teeth feature a curved, notched profile capable of shearing through shell, bone, and cartilage. Tiger sharks investigate prey with slow, deliberate passes before committing. But once committed, they are tenacious. The operator deployed a mesh bag of fish scraps. Within 20 minutes, a large tiger shark estimated at 13 to 14 feet began circling at approximately 30 yards. The cage was lowered off the stern. Prestholt entered wearing a borrowed mask and snorkel. The cage hung roughly 4 feet below the surface. The wide bar spacing left gaps of 8 to 10 inches. The rebar construction offered none of the reinforced welding or certified spacing found on commercial units. The door hung loosely in its frame, the steel pin rattling with each passing swell. The shark approached within minutes, drawn by the dispersing scent, making progressively closer passes. On the third approach, its snout pressed between 2 of the wider-spaced bars as it investigated. The shark bumped the cage, pressing against the frame and shifting the structure slightly. According to Danica's account, her mother pushed away from the shark and stumbled backward against the cage door. The impact knocked the steel pin from the loop closure, and the door swung open. Prestholt fell through into open water, surfacing approximately 6 feet from the cage. The tiger shark had withdrawn and was circling. She began swimming toward the boat ladder, roughly 15 feet away. She covered approximately half the distance. The moment she hit the water, there was nothing between her and a 13-foot tiger shark. No bars, no boat, no time. Just open ocean and 15 feet to a ladder she would never reach. The shark struck from below and behind, its jaws closing around her left leg and hip. The serrated teeth sheared through tissue and ground against bone as the animal shook its head once with tremendous force. The impact pulled Prestholt beneath the surface momentarily before the shark released. She resurfaced, and after several seconds of stunned confusion aboard the boat, the operator and Danica managed to haul her partially onto the swim platform. The shark continued circling at a distance as the operator started the engine. The bite had severed the femoral artery and torn through muscle from hip to knee. Blood loss was massive despite tourniquet attempts. Prestholt lost consciousness within minutes and was unresponsive by the time the boat reached the harbor. The investigation led to criminal charges, including involuntary manslaughter. The cage fell far below any commercial standard. Danica's testimony formed the basis of the prosecution's case. What I keep thinking about is Danica. She watched her mother climb into that cage, watched the shark circle, watched the door open, and then watched everything that came after. That's the part of this story that doesn't leave me. A rebar cage, a gravity pin, and a panicked stumble. That's all it took to turn a bucket list trip into a fatal encounter. But the final story is the hardest one to sit with, because in New Zealand, no one cut corners, no one broke the rules, and it still ended in death. It was April 9th, 2013, and a heavy autumn swell rolled through Foveaux Strait, the notoriously rough channel separating New Zealand's South Island from Stewart Island. The strait's nutrient-rich waters attracted seasonal great white shark populations, following fur seal colonies along the coastline, making it one of the few locations where cage diving research could be conducted. Shunsaku Edogawa was a 42-year-old marine biology doctoral candidate studying white shark migratory behavior in southern hemisphere waters. He had spent over a decade in marine research, beginning with reef ecology in Okinawa before shifting to elasmobranch behavior. This wasn't a tourist chasing a thrill like I first thought. This was a scientist doing careful, methodical work on a limited budget, making the best decisions he could with what he had. That's what makes this one different from every story before it. Edogawa's research budget was limited. He had hired a local fishing charter out of the small port of Oban, operated by a veteran skipper who had assisted researchers previously. The vessel was a 40-foot steel-hulled fishing boat, sturdy but not purpose-built for dive operations. The cage was a rented commercial unit in sound condition, with a top hatch that latched from inside using a butterfly bolt. Edogawa had mounted an external camera rig to the upper frame, requiring occasional manual adjustment through the partially opened hatch. The expedition had been delayed twice by weather. The morning presented a narrow window. The vessel anchored approximately half a mile off the island's eastern coast. The crew deployed a bait bag and lowered the cage off the port side. The swell caused the cage to swing against the hull in an irregular rhythm. Each wave cycle slammed the cage against the vessel's waterline, the steel bars grinding and rotating unpredictably. Surge and particulate reduced underwater visibility well below the surface conditions. Great white sharks in New Zealand waters tend to be transient individuals following seasonal prey, making their behavior less predictable. A shark investigating bait in rough conditions is subject to the same surge forces as the cage, meaning both move independently through the water column. Approaches are faster and less controlled, with sharks accelerating to maintain trajectory against the swell. A collision in rough seas carries the combined momentum of both objects, amplifying impact force far beyond what either would generate alone. Edogawa entered the cage late morning. The first hour produced distant sightings, but no close approaches. The bait bag was refreshed and repositioned closer to the cage. Shortly before noon, a large great white, estimated at over 14 feet, began making investigatory passes, each one tighter and faster as the shark oriented on the bait. Edogawa's external camera had shifted on its bracket during the cage's repeated collisions with the hull. According to the investigation's reconstruction, he waited until the shark had completed a pass and appeared to be moving off to a safe distance before unlatching the top hatch and pushing it partially open, reaching through to adjust the camera bracket with both hands. His head and upper torso were above the cage's top bar line. He waited for the shark to move off. He checked. He made a judgment call that had been correct every other time he'd done it. But much to my horror, this time, the ocean disagreed. A swell surge pushed the cage away from the hull. At the same moment, the shark made its fastest approach yet, accelerating toward the bait bag within close range of the cage. The shark's trajectory intersected with the cage at the precise point where Edogawa was exposed above the frame. The skipper reported seeing the shark's dorsal fin surge through the surface, followed by an eruption of white water around the cage's upper section. The impact was a collision, not a deliberate attack. The shark's snout struck Edogawa's torso at speed, the combined momentum of the animal and the swinging cage amplifying the force. The shark's jaws partially closed during impact, and the brief contact opened severe lacerations across his chest and abdomen before the animal veered away and dove. It wasn't an attack. It was geometry. Two objects in motion, one wave at the wrong moment, and a researcher in the wrong place by a margin of inches. Edogawa fell back inside the cage. The crew hauled it immediately. The blunt force collision had caused severe chest trauma, and incidental contact with the shark's teeth had opened deep lacerations that accelerated blood loss. The crew applied pressure and radioed for emergency assistance, but the nearest rescue helicopter was based on the South Island mainland. Shunsaku Edogawa lost consciousness within minutes and was pronounced dead before the helicopter reached the vessel. The investigation concluded that the death resulted from rough sea conditions, the cage's proximity to the bait source, and the researchers' decision to open the hatch during an active encounter. The shark had not targeted Edogawa. It had followed the bait, and he had been in its path at the worst possible moment. No charges were filed. The university suspended its cage-based field research program pending a safety review. This is the story I come back to. Not because someone was reckless or because an operator cut corners, but because everything was done as well as it could have been, and it still wasn't enough. Sometimes the margin between a close call and a fatality is a single swell at the wrong second.